right, so welcome to the Mind Your Gut workshop. So this is the second session that we're having, and this week we're talking about intermittent fasting. Some of the information might be reviewed to anyone that attended last month, but mostly today we'll be talking about intermittent fasting. So an introduction to those of you that might not know me, my name is Ailar, and I'm a certified clinical functional nutritionist at Pacific Integrative Psychiatry. I have my bachelor's degree in molecular and cell biology. And after that, I started becoming really interested in gut health and the gut's role in our overall health and especially our mental health and the gut-brain connection. So that's why I pursued my degree in human nutrition and functional medicine from University of Western States. And now I practice through a functional medicine approach to treat the root cause of diseases and conditions with a focus on gut health. So just so you know who will benefit from this workshop, here are a few pointers that you might be learning. Anyone that is interested in learning more about the different types of fasting and how they impact the body, determining which types of fast or fasts might be working for you and the hours of fasting that might be appropriate for you, how fasting can help improve your energy levels and help decrease brain fog or fatigue, optimizing your gut health through nutrition and lifestyle modifications, and also utilizing nutrition to fight the underlying cause of chronic physical and mental conditions, which is a key focus in functional medicine. So what you can expect in these workshops is that we'll have a live session every fourth Wednesday of the month, and it will be at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time over Zoom. So today we're talking about introduction to fasting and ways to support the gut. Participation is welcome and encouraged if you feel comfortable. At the end of the session, we'll open it up to Q&A from the participants and also some of the questions that I received ahead of time. A few rules to keep in mind is please listen when others are speaking, respect each other's privacy, and put away any distractions. So this is the outline of today's workshop. We'll briefly review the gut-brain connection and the importance of gut health overall. Then we'll move on to talk about the different types of fasting and the benefits of fasting for physical and mental health. And we'll also talk about when is the best time to fast, and this might be different for each individual. We'll also talk about who should avoid fasting because fasting might not be appropriate for everyone. And then lastly, we'll do the Q&A. All right, so before we get started, we'll just do a quick mindful check-in with ourselves. So the first question is just checking in with your gut and how your gut is feeling today. So did you have any digestive issues? Did you experience any abdominal pain, constipation? And moving on to the second question, how was your digestion today and how were your bowel movements? Did you have any bowel movements? The third question is, have you ever experimented with fasting? So whether it was on your own or with your healthcare provider, and if so, what worked well for you? And if not, then what did not work well for you? The fourth question is, how did you sleep last night and how are your energy levels today? So we'll also talk about how fasting can affect our sleep and vice versa, how our sleep can affect our eating. And then lastly, how does your mental health impact your digestion or your gut health and vice versa? So just take a little bit of time to reflect on these questions for yourself. You're welcome to write down your thoughts or just kind of keep them in your mind. And if anyone has experimented with fasting before, I'll just ask you to put a thumbs up in the chat saying that you've tried it. If it worked well, maybe a thumbs up. And if it didn't work well, maybe a thumbs down. And we'll talk more about that. Okay, and another review of the difference between a functional medicine versus a conventional medicine approach. So at Pacific Integrative Psychiatry, we practice a functional medicine approach, which aims to determine the root cause of chronic conditions, versus in a conventional medicine setting, they are more focused on treating the symptoms, or what's referred to as the Band-Aid method, or covering up the symptoms. In functional medicine, we treat the whole body or the system, and we take an individualized approach, whereas conventional medicine treats the individual organs or the individual body parts. In functional medicine, diet and nutrition play a very central role, but in conventional medicine, there's little to no focus on diet and nutrition. In functional medicine, diet, exercise, and lifestyle modifications are often the first step approach to any treatment, versus conventional medicine may focus more on medications as the first approach, which often lead to several downstream side effects. Functional medicine is more patient-centered versus disease-centered in conventional medicine. And lastly, functional medicine is very effective for long-term and chronic care, while conventional medicine is more effective for acute care or in the case of emergencies. So here's a review of why our gut health is so important. So first, we need to know that the gut is actually responsible for making several hormones and neurotransmitters in the body. For example, about 95% of the serotonin in the body is actually produced in the gut. The serotonin is a neurotransmitter that's responsible for our mood and our happiness. So the majority of that is actually produced in the gut. And the gut produces 400 times more melatonin than the pineal gland of the brain. So the gut is actually primarily making this hormone that's controlling our sleep. The gut is also really important for proper digestion, and it can help prevent things like dysbiosis, leaky gut, and other digestive issues. The gut also is responsible for about 70% of the immune system, so it can help us fight infections and disease. And lastly, the gut helps fight inflammation, which is often the root cause of several chronic conditions or metabolic imbalances. All right, so now we'll move on to talk a bit more about fasting. So we're going to be talking about the 3 types of fasting that I have listed here today, and we'll go a bit more into detail with the second one, which is time-restricted eating. So the first type of fasting is intermittent fasting, which is what most people hear nowadays, and it actually refers to fasting for long periods of time. So not just a few hours, but actually fasting for an entire 24-hour period, 36 hours, 48 hours, so days of fasting. And during this time, it's okay to have beverages like water and tea as long as they don't contain things like sugar, cream, or milk, and this won't really disrupt your fast. The second type of fast is time-restricted eating, and this is the most common type of fast that we hear about nowadays. And this is eating within certain hours of the day. So, for example, having an 8-hour, 10-hour, or 12-hour eating window. So, as an example, someone who is fasting, someone who has an 8-hour eating window and is fasting for 16 hours might just eat between the hours of 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Lastly, there's a type of fasting called fasting mimicking diet. And this is putting your body under calorie restriction for a few days in a row. So, for example, someone who typically eats a 2,000 calorie diet might choose to only eat 1,200 calories for 3 days in a row. All right, so now we'll talk a bit more about the benefits of fasting. So first, it's important to know that fasting can actually help improve your digestive system. It can help reduce symptoms of abdominal pain, bloating, gas, etc. Fasting can help increase your metabolism, or how well your body burns calories and food. Your metabolism is also how your body utilizes the mitochondria for making ATP or energy. Fasting can help with weight loss, specifically losing abdominal or belly fat. Fasting can help fight insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is one of the root causes of several chronic conditions, such as PCOS, type 2 diabetes, and there's even a link now between insulin resistance and Alzheimer's disease. Fasting can also help improve mental health by increasing our energy levels, reducing brain fog, and even helping the gut health by producing some of those key hormones and neurotransmitters that we need for our mental health. And lastly, fasting has been shown to help with our longevity, and that's our aging process, right? So reversing the aging process through processes like autophagy, mitophagy, which basically refer to the breaking down and repairing of our cells. So one of the most common questions I get from patients is, when should I be fasting? And it's really important to know that our bodies are all really different. So the time that you fast is more specific for you than somebody else. But it's important to select a fasting or eating window that's most manageable for you based on your lifestyle, your work schedule, your social life, your family life, and selecting a time that works for you most days of the week. And the reason I say most days of the week is because it's really difficult to follow a specific eating window or a specific fasting schedule every single day, especially depending on the days and whether your schedule is the same or not. But there are a few guidelines or parameters to keep in mind when you begin fasting, or if you choose to start trying out some of these fasts. And the first one is to try and avoid eating about 3 hours before bed. So making sure your last meal is about 3 hours before bed. And this has been shown to help with proper digestion, getting a better sleep quality. The second is eating about 1 to 2 hours after waking up. So getting that first meal about 1 to 2 hours after you wake up. Selecting fasting hours that correlate with your nocturnal phase. And the nocturnal phase is the phase that we're sleeping when it's dark outside. So making sure that your eating window correlates with the daytime and the fasting window correlates more with the nocturnal phase. And lastly, it's important to know that fasting onset takes time. So meaning that the minute you stop eating that last meal isn't actually when the fast begins. It takes time for your body to enter into the fasting state. And this depends on a few different factors, such as the portion size of your meal, the content of your meal, whether it was heavy in carbohydrates, protein, fats, your level of activity, how physically active you are after that meal, and also your metabolism. All right, so there are a few people who should avoid fasting. So for example, women who are breastfeeding, pregnant, or are trying to become pregnant, individuals with a history of cancer, and anyone with a history of eating disorder. And the reason why fasting should be avoided in these groups is because when we fast, we're putting the body into starvation mode by depriving it of food and calories. And this actually puts the body into a state of stress by increasing cortisol. And when our body is responding to stress, it causes our immune system to shut down, and it causes our reproductive system to slow down as well. And that's why some of these people may not be fasting, and it's not actually appropriate for them to be fasting. It's also important to make sure that your hormones and your blood sugars are well regulated before you start experimenting with fasting. All right, so just summarizing some of the things that we talked about so far. So there are a variety of different types of fasts. What we eat can be just as important as when we eat. Research is limited and long-term results are often unknown right now when it comes to fasting, but fasting can still be beneficial, especially in some of these areas that we talked about, such as insulin resistance, digestion, helping with weight loss, improving mental health. A 12-hour fast typically works well for most people. So for example, fasting from 7 p.m. until 7 a.m. the next day. Drinking water and tea, as long as it doesn't contain sugar, cream, or milk, are okay and won't break your fast. And fasting should be based on your lifestyle and can take time to initiate. And when I say it can take time to initiate, I mean that the fast doesn't begin immediately after that last meal. And it's important to know that if you are not currently experimenting with fasting, but you choose to start, then it's important to start with a smaller fasting window and gradually increase it over time. So, for example, you might start with an 8-hour fasting window, then increase to 10, 12, 14, 16 over the next few weeks. Here are some things that you can do to take action. So first, knowing that nutrition should be personalized and is different for everyone. It's important to make nutrition a priority in your day. I recommend listening to your body's signals and cues that it's sending you. So when you're full, when you're hungry, if something is working well for you or if it's not working well for you. I recommend setting really specific and short-term goals. And an acronym I like to use is called SMART, which stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. So as an example, instead of setting a goal of fasting for this next month, I would recommend being really specific with that goal and saying, for example, on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday of this week, I'm going to fast from 7 p.m. until 7 a.m. So it's a small goal and it's very specific and something that you can try to stay consistent with. And lastly, I would recommend considering talking to a functional nutritionist if you're interested in working with me to create a personalized plan for you. You can contact us at contact@pacificintegrativepsych.com. Again, that's contact@pacificintegrativepsych.com. All right, so now we'll move on to the Q&A section of the workshop. And if you do feel comfortable turning on your microphone or your camera to ask the question, I definitely invite you to do that. If you don't feel comfortable, you're welcome to just drop your question in the chat box. And while everyone is doing that, I'm actually going to answer some of the questions that I got ahead of time. And I will share those with you. All right, so the first question I got is, will fasting slow down my metabolism? So we briefly talked about this, and fasting can actually help increase your metabolism in most cases. So it also depends on how frequently we eat during the eating window. So, for example, eating one large meal can actually have a negative effect on your metabolism versus if you choose to eat 3 smaller meals and if you have snacks in between those meals. So they've actually found that people who do eat one large meal, even though they're fasting for a long period of time, this can actually cause their metabolism to slow down and it can lead to weight gain. So ultimately, fasting can help improve your metabolism, but it also depends on the meal sizes, the portion sizes, on how frequently you're eating during the fasting, the eating windows. The next question is, how does fasting affect mental health? So we also talked about this a bit, and fasting is really important for our energy levels. It can help with reducing brain fog. We talked about how the gut is responsible for producing certain hormones and neurotransmitters. So creating a healthy gut environment can be really helpful for our brain health, because now we can properly produce a lot of those neurotransmitters like serotonin that are responsible for our mood and energy levels. The next question I got is, I tried intermittent fasting, but got too hungry and ended up overeating. What would you recommend? So this depends on the fasting period and the eating window, right? So if someone is fasting for a very long period of time, and especially if they're fasting during the hours that they're awake and active, it would make sense that their body would need energy from food and that they would start to become hungry. It also depends on what the meals are made of. So if you are eating a carbohydrate-rich diet during the eating window, it's likely that you're going to become very hungry, and especially hungry during the fasting period, versus if you're eating a diet that's more rich in protein, healthy fats, fiber, this is going to provide you with more sustainable energy even onto the fasting period. You just check the chat here. Okay. All right. And the next question was, so how long does it take before you can actually see results from fasting? And again, this depends on the individual, since our bodies are also different. But it also depends on what results you're looking for, right? So if someone is choosing to fast for digestive reasons, then they might start to see results much more quickly, perhaps within 1 to 2 weeks, versus someone who is choosing to fast for weight loss reasons. And this is because the changes in our blood glucose, our metabolism can take time. So this individual might not actually see weight loss results for 2 or even 3 months. But typically, research has shown that fasting can take about 8 to 10 weeks before most people start to see some changes or noticeable results. All right. And the last question is, what happens if you stop fasting for a few days or a few weeks? And again, so you don't have to fast every single day of the week to see some changes or improvements in your digestion, your metabolism. But your body may start to go back to some of the symptoms it was experiencing before if you completely stop fasting altogether. Especially for people who are trying to lose weight through fasting, you might notice that if you go back to eating the way you were before, you might gain some of that weight back and your metabolism might start to slow down. And this is usually because people start to eat larger portion sizes, eating more frequently, or even eating closer to bedtime when you're no longer fasting. So is it important to go into the fast with a specific food group or to break the fast with a specific food group? Yeah, that's a really great question. So when we're fasting, for example, when you're sleeping, everyone's body is kind of entering into a fasting state. And this causes our blood sugars to drop because we're not eating anything. Our body's actually processing and eliminating a lot of the food. And the first thing that we eat causes an initial elevation in the blood sugars. So this is one of the main reasons why I always recommend starting the day with a protein and ideally a healthy fat. And the reason for that is protein is a really great way to help control our blood sugars, and it provides us with sustainable energy and controls our appetite, versus a carbohydrate like a piece of bread, which turns into sugars much more quickly in the body. So initially we feel really full, but then you might start to notice that an hour, 2 hours after that meal, you start to feel hungry again, and you might even start to feel tired and fatigued. And that's because your body ran out of the energy from the carbohydrates and you need to go eat again to get more energy. So is it okay to fast regularly for several years, or is it better to switch it up? Length of fast, how often, and do women need to watch how often we fast and for how long? Yeah, that's a really great question. So there is some research showing that there is a difference between men and women, especially when it comes to intermittent fasting. Some of the concerns have been for muscle mass loss if people fast for long periods of time. So a 12-hour fast is something I recommend for most people. And that's something you can do for, pretty much your whole life. And that's why it's called breaking the fast, right? We're having breakfast, and that's breaking the fast in the mornings. So if you do want to fast for, let's say, 12 hours from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., that's a type of fast that you can do pretty much your whole life. But doing a fast that, let's say, lasts for 14 hours or 16 hours, that might not be suitable for most people, especially since our lifestyle changes. Our mental health can change, our hormones, our blood sugars. So many factors can change, and it's important to adjust and adapt the way that we eat and the times that we eat depending on our age and if there's some new condition that we're diagnosed with. So always checking in with your body and also with a healthcare provider to see if there's a specific type of fast that might not be recommended for you. All right, let's see. Any other questions? All right. And again, for anyone who joined us a bit later, this workshop is being recorded and the recording will be sent out to anyone that signed up. So you can see all the slides and all the information, or if you didn't have a chance to take notes. All right. And again, my name is Ailar, and I'm the functional nutritionist at Pacific Integrative Psychiatry. If you're interested in working with me, you can send us an email at contact@pacificintegrativepsych.com. I will just put that on the screen here again. Let's see. Yeah, so here's the email, contact@pacificintegrativepsych.com. So thank you everyone for joining. And next month, so the 4th Wednesday of September, we'll be having our next live session. And this session is going to be about IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome. So if you have any questions ahead of time, feel free to send them to me, and you can again sign up through the link. All right, thank you everyone.